Hello everyone and welcome to Heart Yoga Radio. We're sitting indoors today because it's extremely windy outside. So what's the inspiration for this podcast today? Well, looking at unfolding events around the world, we've got the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the cost of living crisis, environmental Armageddon, and all the rest. We've got parts of Britain still underwater, many parts still without electricity or smashed to bits through extreme wind damage, with possibly more to come. So the level of insecurity, not just in our country but probably in every country in the world, is increasing daily. And this feeling of insecurity, when you look around and see how it is being expressed and how people are responding to it, unfortunately, people can respond to the anxiety and the insecurity of the rapidly unfolding events in ways which unfortunately can be quite destructive to them and to society in general, in their quest to diminish the feeling of anxiety that the insecurity is bringing to them. Unfortunately, it is happening that groups of people, sometimes quite large groups of people, are finding refuge in, how shall I put it politely, really crazy ideas that are ultimately unhelpful to them. So what we wanted to talk about today is this feeling of insecurity and how we can respond to the insecurity in a way which ends up leading us to positive action, something that will be actually helpful for us and to the people around us. Okay then, so Pete, where is a good starting point to address this question, do you think?
Well, a good place to begin is the beginning.
As ever.
Yeah. What strikes me initially about this whole question of security, right, is that there are two, at least two, there may be more than two, but there are at least two sort of like obvious aspects to it. And you alluded to both of them in your introduction. On the one hand, there's the way in which insecurity manifests individually within the psyche of an individual. And I'm just going to call that individual psychological insecurity. I mean, sometimes I'll say on the individual level, and sometimes I'll say I'll talk about psychological insecurity. But that's about how actual living individuals feel about their situation as they are in the midst of it and living through it. So that's there, and you've sort of outlined our objective here, which would be that like maybe one person out there will listen to this and go, oh yeah, this is helpful to me. We're funny people. We want the significance of being helpful. You know, it's how immature of us, but there you go. We do. So on the one hand, the individual and psychological manifestation of insecurity. On the other hand, the material insecurity, which you talked about in relation to, well, war, scarcity, famine, plague.
It's all, we've got all of it. You know, when I look at our lives at the moment and the lives of people across the world, I was trying to think this morning, is there a single area of our life that is actually nice and firm and secure and recognisable? And I actually couldn't think of anything. Yeah.
I mean, there are certain insecurities which threaten the entire species, and they're very, very pressing right at the moment. Obviously, global warming, which in fact is only one aspect of massive environmental degradation that's taking place and that's accelerating, and which the world tried to address with the various COPs, and the last one was COP26, which was forgotten the day after.
Yeah.
And now we're having a resource war, basically. Ukraine, there's a lot... It's not exactly a resource war, but at the same time, you try and understand that situation without factoring in the fact that Russia is the world's second biggest exporter of oil, and that it exports its gas through the Ukraine through pipelines into Europe. There are other pipelines. There's a pipeline under the Baltic, for instance, across northern Germany, all this sort of stuff. But there's a huge pipeline gas through the Ukraine. And so, like, the fossil fuel economy is still there, like, throwing up the shit and chaos that it does, at the same time as it's burning up the planet and destroying the possibility of human life. So if you feel insecure in this situation,
it's very rational.
Given that there's a global pandemic still, whatever they say about it.
However much Johnson pretends there isn't.
And pretty well any economist of any stripe, even neoliberal economists, with very few exceptions, Marxist economists, anarchist economists, Keynesian economists, are all saying, oh my God, the economy is fucked.
Oh, yeah.
Each for their own reasons, because it's fucked from whichever angle you look at it.
Pretty much, unfortunately, yes.
And now this morning, at 5 o'clock this morning, Moscow Standard Time, Vladimir Putin makes us all suddenly remember the fact that the Russian Federation has got many, many thousands of nuclear warheads targeted at the major cities of the West.
Apart from London, because they own London and don't.
They own London. They won't blow London up. And in
Yeah.
fact, I'm thinking that maybe coming to West Wales might not have been the best bug out going. In fact, as I DM'd the Prime Minister this morning, my old friend Boris, hey, comrade Boris, have you got any ideas where's a good place to bug out now that World War III's is in progress? What about London? I'm thinking London, because the Russians are not going to nuke their own shit, are they? He hasn't got back to me. He's such an ill-mannered...
I know, so rude.
But this is what these privileged types are like, So, nuclear annihilation, environmental degradation, economic instability, cultural instability, the culture war thing. I mean, these things can blow up into all kind of manner of nasty things.
And it's not surprising or unreasonable that people are freaking out.
No, of course not. But two aspects, the individual and the collective. And I think we have to tease them apart and then put them back together. And that is how I would proceed if you were asking me to write a piece on this. And my plan would be, let's look at the individual, let's look at the collective, let's see how they relate. And that question is very, very, very interesting. How do they relate? And it's got more twists and turns in it than you might imagine. You just might imagine this sort of like one-to-one relationship, Not so. If you take a broad look, and of course we always like to take a broad look. We like to look at the different systems which interact with each other. Now, we've done stuff on this before, and I'm pretty sure I've done stuff sort of way back about individual insecurity. And I don't remember exactly, but I've probably talked about Alan Watts' book, The Wisdom of Insecurity. It's like a little self-help book, right? A little book for individuals to get a bit of a handle on their own feelings of psychological insecurity, where they might come from, how one might intelligently comport oneself to that. And I kind of bought hundreds of copies of that book and handed them out for birthday presents and Christmas presents to it, because I just think as far as self-help goes, it's pretty useful. In general, I'm a bit suspicious of the self-help industry, because as soon as capitalism gets hold of it, they turn it into a commodity. We will help you. And then you get the whole kind of thing that's so easy to take the piss out of how gullible Americans are to this stuff. But I mean, the British are very, very close behind, self-help, how to be the better you, and all this. We're on a journey, all this bollocks, And I kind of hate it, because I think it's a big rip-off. But nevertheless, I think Watts is onto something. He was a meditator and a priest at one point in his life, and a Zenist and all the rest of it. It was all these things, Watts. I mean, he described himself as what did he say? A genuine fake. His autobiography is called Genuine Fake, you know.
Yeah.
And I think Watts makes some very good points in that book, and they're points that really draw on the philosophers of change or impermanence, which is called anicca in Buddhism, or anicca, impermanence. Nothing is permanent, not even your emotions, not even yourself, not even any part of you. Everything is fleeting. It's born, it lives, and it dies. Everything. And a view echoed by some great philosophers, Heraclitus in Greece, Lao Tzu in China, which we've done many podcasts about. You know, Lao Tzu is a great philosopher of impermanence. Of course, Nietzsche, I would say, in more modern times, and in a kind of specialised kind of way, even people like Marx, you know, they're all people who try and grasp the process nature of reality. And Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, he did some wonderful work around that idea. What's his thesis, very roughly, is that we find it very hard to accept this, and we invent ideas to compensate. Just putting it very crudely, we tell ourselves stories to compensate, or we allow ourselves, even worse, to be told stories.
Yeah.
Told and sold stories.
Yeah.
We're on a journey. $100. You know, buy the course online. Special reduction to you, special person. You have been chosen. Only $90. Only $900. Only $9,000. You know, so this is what we do. This is this compensatory mechanism of telling ourselves a story that removes the anxiety of the fact that we are mortal and we can die any moment. And if the universe decides not to kill us just yet, it could perhaps decide to just mow us down and maim us so that we're kind of crippled for the rest of our lives, or blinded, or in need of like constant medical attention, okay, whatever, you know. The insecurity of life is kind of rooted in our animal, material, physical being as biological organisms that grow, sustain a while and die. That's the big one, according to Watts, you know, and according to the Buddha, and according to Lao Tzu. So we don't like change, you know. We don't like the dynamism of things, and we attempt to deny it, just as a kind of almost a primordial reflex. Now I think societies have existed which are able to tell themselves stories that don't fall into that trap. It's not like this is an essence of human beings, particularly, but it's something that's bound to crop up given our organic nature as animals in different societies from time to time. And it's certainly dominated, say, the West, in the form of Christianity, I would say, which tells us that stop worrying about that, your soul's immortal. You know, or stop worrying about the unchanging, because God, immortal, invisible, never changes, the Ancient of Days, etc. So
Very, very comforting.
Yeah, which of course has been an official doctrine of the most politically powerful organisation since the Roman Empire. In other words, the Catholic Church, for instance, you know, dominated Europe and the West for many centuries, with precisely this palliative against impermanence, against the intrinsic insecurity of animal life. So what's his thesis is we tell ourselves stories to compensate for that, because we do not like it. Yeah. And what kind of makes the point that it's a mistake.
People become slaves to the story, but more importantly, slaves to the people who are telling them the story, don't they?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. That's beautifully put, yes. And not only is it a mistake because it's not based in reality. At some level we have to deny what's right in our face, which is our mortality. And the fact that we live in a universe of change, and we ourselves are a universe of constant change, Heraclitean flux, Buddhist impermanence. You know, Lao Tzu's series of transformations, which is what the universe is, from its beginning to its end. You know? So it's a mistake because it's not based in reality. It's also a mistake because what it robs us of.
Absolutely.
And what it robs us of, primarily, I would say, is aesthetic experience. I think all experiences of sublimity are, in fact, experiences in which we throw off our comfort blankets and directly encounter the swirl and turbulence of existence, including our own existence. That's what Lao Tzu's style of meditation is, and the Buddha's actually. You know, it's a style of confronting, not in a hostile way. Being with would be better than in confronting. Comporting ourselves to be open to that very fact of existence as it is unfolding before us and inside us.
Yeah.
You sit on your cushion and there's all this flux, you know. She said, he said, they said, oh, what happened in 1956? Chatter, you know, all that. But to be with it, you know, it's not so much, it's certainly in the hands of Lao Tzu, not an attempt to change ourselves, but an attempt to recognise what's very sort of right in the foreground and the background, for that matter, of the flow of our lived experience.
Yeah, and engaging with that flow helps us to become more resilient and become a lot more skilled at quality problem solving. Whereas if you're just completely hiding from reality in your little bubble, you don't get all of that. Yeah. Like you said, it denies us some very important experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean that advantage of aligning oneself, comporting oneself in the manner recommended by the Buddha and Lao Tzu and Heraclitus is in fact that, you know, with a bit of luck and a following wind, if one has a little bit of ability, the thought becomes clearer, you know, a bit more efficient, you know, because reality grounded. If I can use a sloppy term like reality, I'll put some inverted commas around it, but you know what I mean. This is what is, by reality I mean that which is right in your face, that you can only deny by getting into the most convoluted trains of thought and theorising and speculation, so that you end up arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. You get lost in that, you know. This is the rabbit hole that takes you down. Angels on the head of a pin. Theology. Ontotheology. You're going to get the correct term. Ontotheology, you know. It's the problem. And Watts points it out with tremendous ability, great clarity, in a self-help book for hippies. That was the first thing that jumped into my mind. Oh, yeah, Alan Watts. And of course, we've done podcasts on that. So that, on the individual level, human beings from time to time, and perhaps for the majority of our time, I don't know for sure, but for a lot of the time on our planet, certainly in this culture, we've been in the thrall of this denial, this mechanism of denial of our individual insecurity. What's like Lao Tzu said, just relax into it. It confronts the wrong word, be with it and relax into it, and it's fine. You'll be fine. You don't need to be anxious about this stuff. It's superfluous, but we've been taught for many, many centuries that you have to be anxious about this stuff. What says don't be anxious about this stuff? There's no need. You can learn not to be anxious about it, just be with it. And then you discover either it's very beautiful, and I think there's no experience of sublimity, certainly, in those old 18th century aesthetic categories, sublimity, and a direct encounter with the fact that everything is changing all the time, with this impermanence. And this is why Turner had himself strapped to the mast of a ship and says to the sea captain, sail me out into the worst storm you can find. You know, and he's there with his fucking sketchbook. That's how much of a nutter he was. But that was a tremendous experience. It's why people jump out of aeroplanes and all this daft stuff. We have an experience of the sublime, in which we are dwarfed by the immensity of this swirl and turbulence of existence, which is 1 trillion times more powerful than anything that humans can do. It's anything that Vladimir Putin can do or Joe Biden can do. This is the force and the energy and the violence of the universe, and it dwarfs us. And that's why the great painters of the Sung and the Yuan put their little tiny figures. I mean, I've seen some of those paintings, and they're like 7 or 8 feet tall on big pieces of silk, you know. They're not like little sketches. They are absolutely monumental feats of painting. And so you've got this thing on the wall there hanging down. They're kind of like long and thin. They hang down, don't they? You know, a piece of silk. Big swirly mountains. And a little tiny figure, 1/4 of an inch in the bottom corner, you know. That's the experience of the sublime, being in the landscape. You know. And this is a great aesthetic experience. Now, the experience of beauty, if I'm allowed to use these 18th century aesthetic terms, they're a little bit sloppy. We could do better, but not here now. We are in a similar ballpark, but the experience of beauty is rather more calm than the experience of sublimity. It's more even, it's more peaceful. It's nevertheless, it's just as stirring as the sublime, if one can get it, even though a lot more subtle. But I would say that is in the same ballpark, that beauty, that all deep beauty is perceived by us when we realise that it's fleeting. It's the fleetingness of it which gives it... I mean, I know some people would disagree. Somebody like Otto Rank thought that all art was the opposite of that it attempted to make the artist immortal, at least in terms of reputation and name. Or you know, like the pyramids, great works of art, it's there to provide immortality for the pharaoh. But nevertheless, it seems to me, and you know, and I would argue this, that sublimity certainly and beauty almost certainly are these very, very great experiences which we deny ourselves if we deny our intrinsic animal insecurity, mortality, vulnerability to suffering. And that what is right there on the individual level, your best bet for dealing with that stuff is to meditate on it and lose the anxious comportment to it, the anxious, frightened relationship with it, which has been used to jerk us around for centuries. So that is what I think how this, you know, how the question of insecurity is best glossed very roughly in terms of the individual. And in terms of the individual psychology, the individual psyche, this is psychological insecurity. So I'm going to try and encapsulate a few of those things now. And I want to say that if one repudiates impermanence, then you have to rely on magical thinking, like immortality, God, etc. You know, the unchanging. It is magical thinking. The immortality of the soul is magical thinking. And you have to rely on that if you want to have some kind of repudiation in your mind, in your belief system, of this stark fact of impermanence. We do not want to buy into that one, except it would be great for us if we did. So we have to rely on magical thinking. And of course religion, organised religion, has been very good as a mechanism for producing this magical palliative, which also incidentally, or perhaps not incidentally, has allowed the institutions of religion to become enormously politically powerful. Even though that's waning now, but we have had a whole kind of theological chunks of time in certain societies where this is what the story has been, you know. But the tellers of the stories have become the controllers of the society by exploiting the frightening insecurity of animal human life, animal physical human life. Okay, so what about the collective aspects of insecurity? And I call this material insecurity. And this is what you were talking about right at the beginning. You know, you say, well, Well, people, the cost of living is rising at this fantastic rate, but wages are not rising, people's incomes are not rising. You know, we had this pandemic out the blue. What's to say there isn't going to be another one? You study the world economy, you study the stock market, and you go, and you start studying the nature of money and the nature of trade, and you go, oh my God, there's no way this can carry on like this. You know, and of course Brexit in this country has rubbed our noses in that instability of the economy, of the global economy, which it is a global thing. The economy is a global thing. And then, of course, you know, climate. Then, of course, on top of that, the big one, environmental degradation, ecological degradation, of which the poster boy of environmental degradation is global warming. And we've got all that. So this is actual real material insecurity, and it comes down to sort of very basic levels. People that have to go to a food bank in the UK, you know. Somebody gets their house possessed in the US, you know. People who are struggling because suddenly rents are just going up, but their wages are not. And so on and so on. People who are having their countries invaded, you know, by much bigger and much more tooled up other nations, other countries. You know. So we've got all, and that amounts to material insecurity. But of course all of that plays out on the level of societies, in fact on the level of global society. Now, there's an aspect of this collective experience, this collective manifestation of human insecurity that I want to draw your attention to, and that is the fact that we, as the type of animals we are, in pretty well every type of society that's ever fucking existed, ever existed, have a propensity to secure and enhance life. You think about that, it sounds like a big grand statement, but there's no way we're not going to try and ensure that our children live into adulthood so that they can reproduce. And, you know, there's no way we're not going to make a technological discovery, say like fire or pottery, you know, or the blockchain. There's no way we're not going to avail ourselves of these things, you know. And this is what we are, you know. We're Homo faber, the animal that makes things, the hominid, the ape that makes things. Homo faber, you know. And we are bound to do that. We are bound to do that, and there's no point getting, to my mind, getting into a weird moral relationship with that aspect of ourselves. You know, we've got to do that. But moreover, we've got to make a proper job of it. You know, we've got to do it a bit better than we've been doing it, because the way we've been doing it so far has led to this impasse of complete ecological unsustainability. If I can summarise this propensity to secure and enhance life, I would say it's inevitable and necessary, but it's also corruptible. The process can be captured by interests, which I think we are living in a period in which the process of securing and enhancing life has been captured by interests. In fact, by a particular economic class, you know, the 1%, the oligarchs, you know, the CEOs of companies like BlackRock and so forth, you know. This is a very, very small number of people. It's a very small number of men mostly. It's a very small number of white men mostly. And that, I would say, is a corruption, because it means that process, that necessary process, stops doing what it's supposed to do. It stops securing and enhancing life. You know, you invent an atom bomb in the attempt to secure and enhance life, and you've actually made life far more insecure, because now you're capable of completely annihilating the species. Whereas before, you could kind of throw rocks and pour boiling oil on a few Vikings, you know, or shoot them with bows and arrows, and that was it, you know, and life went on. Humans had battles and skirmishes. Life went on until World War Two, you know, till 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. And you thought, well, fuck me, this is a different kettle of cod now. We're in that position now. And that's what I mean by the corruption of that necessary and inevitable process. So a question comes in here now then. How does this sit with the wisdom of insecurity? We've thought Alan Watts is talking sense, Buddha's talking sense, Lao Tzu is talking sense, Heraclitus is talking sense, because they're all talking sense on the level of the individual psyche. But you might think that the wisdom of insecurity means that you give up the propensity to secure and enhance life. You know, and certain sort of anti-technology and sort of modern neo-Luddite movements are kind of like that. So, my immune system. We won't have any vaccines, we've got the immune system, you know. And this kind of stuff. That's obviously not viable either. So how do these two things sit together? And as I said earlier on, this is where it gets interesting. So on the one hand, we've got this never-ending quest to secure and enhance life, this restlessness. On the other hand, it seems, if Watts is right, if Buddha's right, etc., that we can't eliminate all insecurity. And if Alan Watts and the Buddha are in fact wise, we shouldn't even be bothered by that. We should say, well, we've got this insecurity, it's the nature of things. It's actually, as difficult as it is for us we have to do a lot of meditation to accommodate ourselves to it. But once we do, we realise it also grants us some very great goods, aesthetic experience, clarity of thought, you know, a way of analysing that takes account of movement instead of trying to deal with fixed things. Instead of dealing with structures, you start dealing with processes. It's like immensely scientifically productive as well as artistically productive to actually embrace this thing. But it seems like there's a bit of a push and a pull there. You know, they don't sit square with each other, these two, do they? And it's at this point I always keep just being reminded by a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You know, trust in God but tie up your camel. You know, trust in God, there's the psychological thing. Of course, we're thinking that God's part of the problem, but it's like, trust in God actually means, for us, be okay with your impermanence and the impermanence of the world. Just settle down into that, because there ain't going to be anything you can do about it. You know, except by telling yourself a load of fantastic lies. And denying what's right in front of your face. But tie up your camel. Tie up your camel is material insecurity. Look after your practical affairs. That means plant your seeds in the spring, you know. Do your very cunning organic methods to make sure you don't get potato blight or whatever. You know. Build your local community with your goodwill and do all that work of liaising with people, forming cooperations with people and so forth. Do all that. That's what tie up your camel means. Tie up your camel actually is on that level of what I've called like the collective, practical, material insecurity. You deal with your material insecurity by tying up your camel. You deal with your psychological insecurity with a deep trust in all the facts, in all the root facts of your existence. You can call it trust in God if you like. And that is what the conundrum is, and that is the way individual insecurity sits with collective insecurity. And tying up your camel actually means that we should build societies and culture and politics, political processes, governments if you like, systems of managing our collective energy, our collective purpose, that does what it's supposed to do, which is to secure and enhance life. Society is a machine for securing and enhancing life. Culture is a machine for securing and enhancing life. Should be, but it's corruptible. And it's not in a moral sense. It's just that it can easily get captured by single classes. which very, very frequently in human history it has done. Now, if David Graeber and David Wengrow write in their wonderful book, The Dawn of Everything, there have been many societies which it hasn't panned out that way. And they draw this conclusion by consulting the archaeological and the anthropological archive, they call it. And it's a great move. They say we're not looking wide enough when we try and figure out what we can do with human society, what possibilities are open to us. And they show that there are many, many more possibilities. But we, in our modern culture, believe that there are hardly any possibilities. We feel as though we've been driven down into we've been kettled in a cul-de-sac by the world, by our own stupidity. We've been kettled in a cul-de-sac. Graeber and Wengrow, by looking at the archive, tell us that actually there's millions of possibilities. People have done all sorts of imaginative stuff to deal with the conundrum of human life, which has all these tensions at the centre of it, like this one that we're talking about now. And you realise that we could, that tie up your camel means get your shit together and let's build fashion, society, culture, politics, systems of focusing our energy, which we loosely call government, our collective energy and our collective purpose. But actually do what they're supposed to do, which is to secure and enhance life. Now, if at the same time as that human individuals in this society, at least some of them, are able to comport themselves to the inherent insecurity of life, with a lack of anxiety, and at the same time availing ourselves of the goods of our insecurity, i.e. the aesthetic experiences and the modes of thinking that go along with it, then I think we've got a bit of a chance of building a society and a culture and a politics that will do what it's supposed to do to secure and enhance life. In fact, the best way to secure and enhance life is to first of all realise the ways in which life is insecure. Secondly, to embrace that which we can't do anything about, and which actually is very, very intrinsic, very, very deep down in our existence as human beings. And to get to grips with that. And of course, the way forward here, of course, is to be reality grounded rather than grounded in magical thinking. If you're grounded in magical thinking, you're heading straight into that cul-de-sac, that dead end. And what the anxiety that our world is experiencing now, just to put it very, very crudely, is actually the anxiety of being at a complete dead end with nowhere to turn, and feeling that we have no options. Because the truth is, if only we could abandon magical thinking, we'd realise we have loads of options. And if we could abandon being frightened and lashing out in our fear at the intrinsic insecurity of our life, at the fact that we're going to die, at the fact we can be struck by lightning any day of the week, and the fact that, the world might end tonight when Putin presses the button, then we're in with a chance. Otherwise, I think we're not in with a chance. So we had a lot of talk about security, in the political level. I mean, in fact, what was Mr. Putin talking about now, as he's marching his troops into the Ukraine, he's saying, I'm doing this to ensure the security of my people in my nation, Russia, right? I want to guarantee the security of my people. So that, rightly or wrongly, whether he's lying or whatever, you can see how this is like a big theme. And it strikes me that in these terribly unstable conditions, say in the UK, that the working class, the ordinary people, the 99%, that they actually want security, in a very basic sense, material security. Not ridiculous wealth. I mean, people do the lottery and the football pools, and we'll entertain idle dreams of being infinitely rich. But the truth is, you really, really push them in their heart of hearts. What do they want? They're not bothered about being fabulously wealthy. They want being reasonably prosperous, but secure, right? The kids can get an education without bankrupting themselves, without becoming debt peons and a lifetime of debt, which incidentally the government extended the period for repaying student loans from 30 years to 40 years. Right, so you're going to be in debt now if you go and get a degree, if you're a young person stepping out in life, till you're 60. And of course, they're going to make more interest out of it, and they're reducing the number of university places. So you're a working class dad, and your kids are coming up to their teens, and they're doing your GCSEs, and you want them to get on, but you've got this there. There's a kind of an insecurity in not being able to get like the best education. If you've got, just offering education to the people. Simultaneously, we don't want to be bombed in our sleep. We don't want our young people to be conscripted and sent off to get their bollocks shot off, and their tits shot off in a distant country. Right, and we want enough to eat without having to fret about it and worry about it. And a job that's going to be there in 12 months' time. Not a precarious existence going from precariat gig to precariat gig, self-employed, inverted commas, and all the insecurity in that. People are actually being driven mad by this shit.
Yeah, it's really affecting their health as well, because they're just so exhausted.
Yeah, food security.
Yeah.
The basic thing, food security. There will not be a famine. It's extremely unlikely there'll be a famine. Health security. If I get ill, it's not going to bankrupt me. It's going to be bad enough being ill. Bad enough getting cancer or COVID or whatever. Let alone then ending up with, certainly in the US, and our neoliberal politicians want this for the UK too. That you've got a $50,000 debt at the end of it, or a $100,000 debt. When Trump got COVID and they give him the experimental antibodies, and the antibody therapy, they'll give plasma from somebody who's had it, and it cost $100,000, that treatment. He's only in hospital for 2 or 3 days. You and I won't get that. So health security. These basic things is what your working class person wants, on average. This is what the great thrust would be for if you really were able to dig down and investigate people's real desires for themselves and their relatives and their communities.
Yeah.
Community security. You're not going to go out and there's a rival gang from the other religion coming down the street with their fucking tiki torches, coming to wanting to throw a petrol bomb through your window. Or put a bullet through your kneecaps or whatever.
Because if people have security, so this is the base,
yeah.
They can build on that base because it enables them to plan for the future. So they can decide to start a family or move house or change their job or perhaps go, even to go travelling and explore different places and different countries, so that if you don't have your baseline of security, your ability to look into the future and make decisions about what you're going to do with your life is completely wrecked, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course this is what Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn were very, very reasonably non-revolutionary fashion offering as their offer. We will try and do this.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the counter-idea prevailed, and the counter-idea is this. It's that social insecurity is a good thing because it produces a mobile labour force. They'll go where the work is, and if the work's very fleeting and you get a gig here and a gig there, that mobile labour force has become very, very fucking mobile, It's not very convenient to be one of those labourers particularly, That you need to kind of settle a little bit if you're going to do families and careers and studying and all the rest of it, But the argument is, then this is the neoliberal argument, that social insecurity produces this mobile labour force, the dynamism, and that in turn will, the more able workers will become entrepreneurs. They'll think, I'm sick of this, I'm going to now get rich. And, this is the story, and I'll be a self-made man. Mm-hmm. It's all bollocks. There are no self-made men. They all had a silver spoon pretty well. So that's the counter idea, and that is the idea that's prevailed. That has won the battle for now. We need to sort of, obviously, on the battleground of idea, shift it aside with the the analysis of security for citizens, the 99% of citizens on the planet. Number one priority, security. You know, and if your village is going to be flooded because of global warming, that's not helping you to have that security. And it's people who are insecure in that sense, on the verge of famine, that uproot and become refugees, or who become so desperate that they fall prey to manipulators and horribly toxic and malignant ideas, just as some kind of way of relieving the pain of that situation. She said the response to intrinsic insecurity, to impermanence, that this now liberal take has availed itself of, is very easily manipulated by ideologues, and has been for decades, and in fact, on occasions throughout human history and prehistory. There's always some clever Charlies realise they can exploit this.
Absolutely.
And they can tell the stories, And the now liberal counter idea to our plea for security is actually just such an idea, It serves an interest. It serves the interest of the 1%, of the oligarchs, of the capitalists. But I would say that all of the responses to our intrinsic insecurity, all of them, involve a denial of reality. Put your reality in inverted commas, the reality of impermanence, that which is right in our face. Impermanence, mortality, everything shifting and changing. And that in turn gives rise to a suspicion of these very great goods, aesthetic experiences of the sublime, experiences of beauty. And that in turn leads to a consequent truncation of intelligence, as magical thinking is promoted. And now liberalism is as magical in its thinking as angels on the head of a pin.
Yeah.
Instead of God, you've got the market, the invisible hand of the market. If there's ever any example of magical thinking, it is the invisible hand of the market.
Yeah.
So magical thinking ends up being promoted. And of course the Koch brothers have just been allowing money, say the Koch brothers, David died, didn't he, a couple of years ago. But Charles Koch's money is finding its way into anti-vaxxers and other such irrationalists, climate deniers. Yeah. People who think that some kind of science isn't at least our very best bet, even if not foolproof, for getting some purchase on these problems. And I would say that all of this in turn reduces the ability of people to practically secure and enhance life, as we are bound to do. So there's this thing that we're absolutely compelled to do out of our biological existence to secure and enhance life that doesn't work properly because we didn't accept and embrace and celebrate the intrinsic insecurity of life at the outset, and therefore allowed ourselves to be manipulated by the fear and anxiety that arises out of that realisation of our impermanence, as opposed to having an intelligent comportment to it as individuals, and then as societies and communities.
So hopefully some useful ideas there about the way we can respond to the insecurity generated by the rapidly unfolding events of the interesting times we are living in. So I hope that's helpful for everybody, and we'll speak to you soon.